Okay, so you want to own a poultry farm. And the industry you are walking into is enormous. In 2024, American farms produced 9.33 billion broiler chickens, weighing 61 billion pounds, with a farm value of $45.4 billion, according to the Department of Agriculture. Roughly 20,000 family farms grow those birds under contract, and they produce about 95% of the chicken this country eats. Demand is strong and getting stronger. Beef hit a record $9.64 a pound in April 2026, and the American cattle herd is the smallest it has been in 75 years. Chicken is the cheap protein, and Americans eat more of it than anything else. So you build the houses, you raise the birds, you sell them to the processor. Except that is not what happens. Not one part of that sentence describes this business. Two things to hold on to before we go anywhere. The first is that a contract poultry farmer does not own the chickens, not at any point, not the day they arrive, not the day they leave. The company owns the birds, the feed, and the medicine. The farmer owns the buildings and the loan on the buildings, and nothing that walks around inside them. The second is stranger, and it is the mechanism that makes this business unlike almost any other in America. The farmer is not paid on how well they did. They are paid on how well they did compared to their neighbors. Two farmers can raise identical birds, hit identical numbers, and one of them gets a bonus while the other gets a deduction, because the pool of money is fixed and somebody has to be below average. We will get to both, but we start with the buildings, because the buildings are where the money goes and where it stays. Here is the thesis, and everything else is proof. This is not a farming business. It is a leveraged real estate arrangement in which the farmer supplies the capital and absorbs the risk, while the company controls almost every input that determines the outcome. Let's start with what it costs to get in. The University of Georgia puts a new broiler house at roughly $225,000. Georgia construction figures put it around $9 per square foot. But scale is where the number gets serious. An 8-house farm at 54 by 550 feet, so about 237,000 square feet, can run over $5 million before land, which means a 20% equity requirement of around $1 million. Reporting from 2024 documents growers taking loans upward of $2 million. A typical 4-house farm sits somewhere between $1 and $2 million. So you borrow, and here is where the structure gets genuinely unusual. Your loan runs 15 to 30 years. Your contract, in many cases, runs one flock, about 6 weeks. The Small Business Administration's Inspector General put it plainly in a 2018 report. Poultry contracts are often short-term, even though the loan guarantees may span more than 20 years. A Department of Agriculture survey found 45% of growers reported contracts covering only a single flock. Read that mismatch again, because it is the foundation of everything that follows. You are signing a 20 to 30-year obligation against income that is guaranteed for the next month and a half. And there is no guarantee of how many flocks you get. The time between flocks, what the industry calls out time, typically runs 2 to 3 weeks, and sometimes longer. Every extra week of outtime is revenue you simply do not receive, and you do not control it. So what happens if the contract ends? This is the part that turns a difficult business into a trap. A broiler house has essentially no alternative use. You cannot store anything valuable in it. You cannot convert it cheaply. Retrofitting to another company's specifications or to egg laying has been reported to cost anywhere from $200,000 to $2 million. Agricultural law commentary notes these buildings can actually reduce a property's value because of appearance and environmental concerns. And this is not hypothetical. When one major processor went through bankruptcy in 2008 and 2009, it terminated contracts with more than 300 farms across Arkansas, Florida, and North Carolina. The Wall Street Journal called it empty nest syndrome. When another closed plants in 2023, growers were left with $1 to $2 million debts and no birds, and reporting from Missouri, Arkansas, and Investigate Midwest documented the bankruptcies and foreclosures that followed. The asset is worth a great deal with a contract and almost nothing without one, which means the moment you sign, your bargaining power is gone. Now, you could stop the video here, and you would already understand more about this industry than almost anyone who eats chicken. Everything so far is just a capital structure, and capital structures are the easy part. The part that makes this business genuinely singular is how you get paid. And that brings us to the second thing I promised you. Let's look at the settlement. Here is the mechanic, as explained by Alabama Cooperative Extension. The company sets a base rate, say 6 cents a pound. Every settlement week, it totals the grow-out costs across all the farms delivering birds that week, mostly feed, and divides by total pounds to get a company average cost per pound. Then it compares your individual cost per pound to that average. If you came in below the average, you get added pay, maybe 6.5 cents. If you came in above it, you get a deduction, maybe 5.5. That is the tournament. Your pay is a function of your ranking. Now, the central metric here is feed conversion ratio, feed consumed divided by weight delivered. It sounds like a measure of how good a farmer you are. Let's look at what actually determines it. Some of it genuinely is you: ventilation, water systems, temperature management, vigilance, how fast you spot a problem at 2 in the morning. Real skill, real effort, real differences between operators. But feed conversion also depends on the genetics and health of the chicks you were sent, the formulation and quality of the feed you were sent, the age of the breeder flock those chicks came from, the sex mix of the birds, the stocking density, veterinary decisions, when the birds were placed, and when the catch crew came to get them. You did not choose any of those. The company did. And the Department of Agriculture has said this directly. In its 2025 rulemaking, the agency wrote that compensation based on relative performance, when the company controls the operation of the tournament, including the distribution of inputs, creates the potential for growers' performance to be determined by factors outside their control, thereby making the tournament system an ineffective incentive system that is arbitrary and unfair. That is not an advocacy group. That is the regulator in the Federal Register. Now here is where I have to be careful, because the easy version of this story goes one step further than the evidence does. The easy version says companies deliberately give better chicks and better feed to favored growers to rig the rankings. That is a serious accusation, and the most rigorous test of it did not find support. A study published in the Journal of Economics and Management Strategy by Legamon Chai and Vuki Na examined exactly this question and found no significant input discrimination based on grower abilities. So the honest statement is narrower, and it is still damning enough. Nobody has proven the rankings are rigged. What is documented by the government itself is that growers bear the financial consequences of inputs they did not choose and cannot inspect. Those are different claims. I am making the second one. And the industry has a real argument on the other side, which almost nobody presents. Academic work by Tsuluhaz and Vukina found that tournaments actually provide growers valuable insurance against common shocks. Think about what that means. Feed is 65 to 70% of the cost of producing a chicken, and the company owns the feed. When corn prices spike, the grower does not pay for it. When disease sweeps a region, everyone's numbers fall together, so the average falls with them, and no single grower is destroyed by it. A grower selling into an open market would carry all of that risk personally. Under a contract, they do not. That is genuine value, and it is the strongest thing the integrators can say. The counter-argument is equally real. The tournament removes the risk you can't control and replaces it with a different risk you also can't control, and the pool is fixed. Which brings us to the number that shows what the spread actually looks like. The Department of Agriculture's Farm Survey found a median grower fee of 5.55 cents a pound in 2011 and 6.79 cents in 2020. But the distribution is the story. In 2020, the bottom 10% of growers received 4.29 cents a pound. The top 10% received 9.64 cents. 9.64 against 4.29. The top grower is being paid more than twice per pound what the bottom grower is paid for delivering the same product to the same company. And this is zero-sum. The bonuses paid to above-average growers are funded by the deductions taken from below-average growers. The company, on net, buys its chicken at the average regardless, which produces the strangest feature of this pay system. You can get better every single year and still get paid less if your neighbors got better faster. Your effort has no absolute value. It only has a rank. If you know somebody who assumes farmers set their own prices, this is the part to send them. There is no farm price for broilers. The Department of Agriculture says so explicitly because the grower is not selling a commodity. They are being paid a service fee for housing an animal they never owned. Now let's put the numbers together on an actual farm. Alabama Extension published a worked model for a two-house farm of 72,000 square feet. Gross revenue runs $2.75 to $3.25 per square foot, so $198,000 to $234,000 a year. Variable expenses take 25 to 35%. That leaves $128,000 to $175,000 before debt. Then debt service takes roughly half. Annual net farm income lands between $29,700 for a poor performer and $58,500 for a top performer. Scale that to 4 houses, and you are looking at maybe $60,000 to $120,000 of net income on somewhere between $1 and $2 million of invested capital for a job that requires supervision 24 hours a day whenever birds are in the house. Extension guidance notes that 80 to 120,000 square feet is about the maximum one family can run without hiring help. Now, the government data on household income is worth stating fairly because it cuts against the bleakest version of this story. Median household income for contract broiler growers was $106,694 in 2020. That is above the American median and above the median for farm households generally. But look at the dispersion. The bottom 20% of growers earned $170,871 less than the top 20%. That gap is wider than for all farm households and wider than for American households overall. And for smaller growers with 1 or 2 houses, about 80% of household income comes from off the farm. The farm is not the job. The farm is the second job that services the debt. Now, the piece that makes all of this hold together, and it is the one almost nobody knows. You cannot simply take your houses to a different company. Live birds cannot travel far, so roughly 90% of broilers are raised within 60 miles of the processing plant. Your farm is only worth something to a company with a plant nearby. A Department of Agriculture survey found that more than half of growers had only 1 or 2 companies available to them. And economists McDonald and Key measured what that does to pay. In markets with a single company, grower fees ran about 8% lower. In markets with 2 or 3, about 4% lower compared to markets with 4 or more. So the price of your labor is set partly by an accident of geography that you cannot change without abandoning a multi-million-dollar asset that has no other use. That is the whole structure in one sentence. Enormous fixed capital, extremely short contracts, an asset with no alternative buyer, and pay determined by a ranking against neighbors, using inputs somebody else selected. And there is one more layer that surprised me. A substantial share of this capital is federally guaranteed. The Farm Service Agency guarantees up to 95% of covered losses on guaranteed loans. And a 2018 Inspector General report found $1.8 billion in Small Business Administration loans made between 2012 and 2016, improperly issued to poultry operations that were effectively affiliates of the integrators. Which means taxpayers are underwriting a meaningful portion of the debt that locks growers into these contracts. The guarantee makes entry possible, and the entry is what removes the bargaining power. Now, the regulatory picture, and I will keep this factual because it has moved a great deal. In November 2023, the Department of Agriculture finalized a transparency rule requiring companies to disclose contract and tournament information to growers, effective February 2024. In January 2025, it finalized a second rule that would have prohibited docking base pay under tournaments, capped performance pay variability at 25% of annual gross pay, and required companies to justify demanded capital upgrades. That second rule has not taken effect. A presidential executive order in August 2025 revoked the underlying policy, and in May 2026, the agency delayed the rule to December 2027, citing significant estimated costs and legal issues, and signaled intent to rescind it. Industry groups have separately sued to overturn a related anti-retaliation rule. So the transparency rule is live. The pay rule is not. Whether it ever will be is genuinely unsettled, and anyone telling you otherwise is guessing. Let's put a year on it, both ways. In the good scenario, you inherited houses that are already paid for, or you bought in decades ago. Your debt service is small or gone. You consistently rank in the upper half of your settlement group. You are close to a plant in a region with more than one company, so you have some leverage. In that position, this is a solid rural business that produces real income for real work, and thousands of families run exactly that. In the realistic scenario, you built new. 4 houses, $1.5 million, 25 years at current rates. Your placements are decent. Your birds are healthy. You do everything right. Then the company requires an upgrade, new ventilation, new controllers, new equipment. Refuse it, and you may simply stop receiving birds. Accept it, and you add $150,000 to $400,000 of new debt, which eats most of your annual net income. Then a bad flock arrives. Not your fault. Weaker chicks, a feed batch that ran differently. Your feed conversion slips, your ranking drops, and your settlement comes in below average. You are not paid less because you worked less. You are paid less because you finished behind your neighbors. Then the plant closes. Nothing burned down. Your houses are immaculate. Your record is clean. You just discovered that you spent $1.5 million building a facility with exactly one possible customer, that the customer owned everything inside it, and that when the customer left, you still owned the loan. That is the whole thing in one line. In almost every business, you own what you produce, and you sell it to whoever will pay the most. Here you own the building and the debt. The company owns the animals and the feed, and the price of your work is decided by how you rank against the farm down the road. Which means the honest question was never whether Americans will keep eating chicken. 94 billion pounds a year says they will, and demand is rising as beef gets more expensive. The question is, who in that supply chain owns an asset that can be sold to someone else? And on a contract poultry farm, the answer is almost everyone except the farmer. This video is general education about how an industry works, not business, financial, agricultural, or investment advice. If you want the underlying numbers, the Department of Agriculture publishes broiler production statistics. The Economic Research Service publishes grower income and contract data. The Federal Register carries the full text of every rule discussed here, and the major processors disclose segment margins in their filings.